Good evening. My name is Katie.
My name's Destiny.
And I'm Olivia.
And this is the first part in our 3-part book series on how to lie with statistics. So in part 1, we're going to discuss chapters 1 through 4. Chapter 1 is called The Sample with the Built-in Bias. And basically, it talks about bias in sampling. So one of the examples that the book gives is that the average Yeoman class of 24 makes $25,111 per year. However, that was taken from the Yale men who responded to the letter sent out by the New York Times. Now, not all of the class responded, and those who responded could have lied about how much they make a year for various reasons. They could have said that they made more money per year to make themselves sound more important. They could have said they made less because they said that on their taxes and they didn't want the government to come after them. And so, basically, there was bias in that sample. Also, it's easier to find the addresses of people who are more well-off and well-to-do than struggling artists. So, sampling bias is a very important issue. And it affects facts in our media because they can be not accurate. Wouldn't you guys agree?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you guys think of any facts or figures in the media that are not accurate?
Actually, I learned in health class this year that the majority of rapes are not reported to the police. So, therefore, the rape statistic is not correct.
And that's a very good example of bias from the sampling because the sample size is not all there. Also, another kind of bias is telephone and door-to-door surveys because when people go door-to-door, not everyone's home because they're at work or they're out shopping or whatnot, and Destiny can tell us about the telephone surveys.
So with the telephone surveys, the problem we run into is that not a lot of people, or not all of them, answer their telephones when they don't know who's calling. And they don't answer their doors when they don't know who's knocking.
Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, no one wants to talk to the Jehovah's Witnesses, so I mean they wouldn't answer for the surveyors either.
So chapter 2 is called The Well-Chosen Average. Obviously, this chapter is about averages. So, did you guys know that the way we think of averages being you add up all the numbers and then you divide by the number of numbers that there were, right? Okay, well, in this book, he says that there can be certain, different types of averages. So, a median can be an average and a mode can be an average, as well as the mean that we commonly use.
That's very interesting.
So using these different types of numbers, we can kind of skew the data. So obviously, in a normally distributed graph, as it says in the book, the mean, median, and mode are all going to be in the same places. But in a skewed graph, the mean, median, and mode are not going to be the same. So you can use whatever number you want to kind of make it, match what you want it to say. So the example he uses in the book is with, okay, you go to buy a house, and he tells you that the average income for the people that own the houses in that neighborhood is $15,000. Well, then, a year later, you go to a meeting, and he's rallying to get this organization for the housing neighborhood, and he uses a different average, and he says that the average income for the house is only $3,500 a year instead of the $15,000 that he told you when you bought the house. So, this is an example where you can use a different sort of average to obtain what you want, because using the $3,500 average a year will get him more funding for that neighborhood and more government assistance, and then using the $15,000 makes the neighborhood sound more affluent so that people will want to buy in that neighborhood more than others. Can you guys think of any other examples?
Well, I can think of the FAFSA because all colleges put out, the average amount of FAFSA aid that their students get, but they don't necessarily take into account the people who have all their tuition paid for and don't really get any FAFSA money.
That's true.
Or with wages. When they advertise an average wage, you don't know if they're counting the CEO's wage in there too. So, of course you get the average wage for the workers, but it could be higher if they add the CEO's wage in with the average. And if they don't, it could be lower. So that's another example. So you have to know what your averages are so that you can understand where you're going to be.
So chapter 3 is called The Little Figures That Are Not There. And basically it's talking about how different companies and whatnot use lots of groups of small samples until they get the result that they want. So in the case of Doak's toothpaste, they ended up using a sample size of 12, and they tested to see if using the toothpaste would reduce the number of cavities. And of course, once you get enough people testing, you're going to get the result that you want, and it's going to say that cavities decreased. And so another thing is by doing a penny test. And so if you flip a penny heads or tails and you do it 10 times, well, when the author did it, he got an 80% heads. But we know that scientifically it's 50-50. So that's another example of how a small sample size can really have a bias on things. Another example the book gives is a child's growth and development. So if your child is supposed to learn to sit erect at the age of, say, 8 months, I don't know if that's accurate, I'm just giving an example, and your child does not sit erect at 8 months, well, you might think something's wrong with your kid. But that's not necessarily true, because only 50% of kids learn to sit erect at that age. But people who write baby books, such as Giselle, he says that, well, since 50% of kids can do it, then it's the norm. But that's not necessarily true. Can you guys think of any other instances where some bias occurs like this?
Height.
Would you care to elaborate?
Well, when we were all younger, the rate at which we were growing, the doctor or your physician, or whatever you want to call it, would estimate how tall you would end up growing, but that didn't always happen. Sometimes you were taller because you started growing faster, or you slowed down growing. So chapter 4 is titled Much Ado About Practically Nothing. And chapter 4 was all about percent error and what that has to do, what that means, and it brought up the example of Peter and Linda about their IQs. It said that Peter had an IQ of about 98 and Linda had an IQ of about 100. And they said that 101. And they said that Linda was smarter because she had a higher IQ, which was actually above the average of 100. However, they later found that the percent error was about plus or minus 3 points. So actually Peter could have been smarter than Linda, and Linda could have had the lower IQ of about 98.
And this actually can relate to real life with the percent error. When you talk about other standardized tests, not the IQ, but standardized tests that we take, such as the ACT, there could be a percent error in that. So we could actually have gotten a better or lower score than if we did based on percent error.
Oh, depends, man.
For this reason, during our research projects, we'll always calculate our percent error, because that way we can just kind of give a margin of error for to adjust for our human error and our outside variables. So that's percent error for you.
And that concludes our first book talk in the series of 3. Thank you for watching.